Welcome to Poland Daily Culture. I'm Jon Carter, and on today's episode we're joined by candidate for Marso One project, Mikołaj Zieliński. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me here.
Absolute pleasure. Right, Mikołaj, got a lot of questions I want to ask, and I think it's going to be an interesting conversation because there is just it's such a deep topic to explore. So anyway, I'm going to start off, most obvious question, how did you become a part of the Marso One project?
So my colleague at work told me 5 years ago that there was something like one-way mission to Mars and selection had started at the time. So I Googled about it and it turned out that indeed there was something like this. I couldn't believe initially. I thought that it was some psychological experiment or something like this to see how many people would be ready to apply or something like this. But it turned out it was a real thing. There were real people behind it, scientists and engineers. And immediately I got convinced that, yeah, I have to try. Even if it's not a real thing, it's better to apply and see later what this happens. And yeah, it's still developing until today. After 5 years, they make little progress to make it happen. And more people is engaged, involved, and yeah,
so
it's a really thing.
The way you're answering that suggests to me that you had some sort of thoughts about this idea before you read about the project.
1 or 2 years earlier, there was another similar project called Virgil. It was in cooperation Google and Virgin Galactic, Richard Branson. They also announced selection for Mars mission, but it was on the 1st of April. It was just a joke.
But that sparked your interest when you saw that.
At that time, initially I couldn't believe that something like this is about to happen, because I have some interest in science and technology, and I try to follow up on all these things. And I know that NASA was trying to send humans to Mars for the last 30, 40 years, and I know about some other mission with satellites, rovers, landers sent by NASA, Roscosmos, or earlier Russian Space Agency, and I know how difficult it is, how many accidents happened, and it was quite a brave idea for me at that time. But when I started reading about it and listening to people who were two co-founders who came up with the idea of one-way mission, and also I was reading a book written by Robert Zubrin, who was the greatest advocate of human mission to Mars. And based on all these things, I understood that 2 days with our current technology, if you have enough money, you can really send humans to Mars.
Marso One is a highly ambitious project aiming to establish a permanent human settlement on Mars. It might sound like science fiction, but they have scheduled several unmanned missions in the next few years, which will create a habitable settlement before rigorously trained crews depart to Mars. This team is yet to be established. There is currently a 100-person shortlist under evaluation, with that eventually being whittled down to 24 before the candidates undergo some of the toughest psychological training known to humanity. The shortlist includes people from all around the world with a variety of backgrounds, including the only Polish citizen, Mikołaj Zieliński. Mikołaj is a software programmer with a passion for science, discovery and adventure. 5 years ago, he learnt about the Marso One project, and given that the only initial conditions for application were being aged over 18, he immediately applied. However, Mikołaj is not your average wannabe astronaut. His strong desire to discover and help civilization have led him to be prepared to make the ultimate sacrifice and never return to Earth. Could you tell us then about sort of your personal motivating factor to participate in this project?
So I was always fascinated with great discoveries and adventures of field scientists. And I thought that I never wanted to be an astronaut, because I knew that Poland had no space agency. So to become an astronaut, I would have to change my citizenship. For example, to be the US citizen and then apply to NASA. But I didn't want to do it, so I was thinking about some other goal for myself. But it was always around somewhere where science meets adventure. Like field scientists who are studying, for example, the ocean floor and things like this. And then suddenly I got to know about Marso One, and I thought that this is even better, because it will be the most adventurous thing that you can think about.
I'd say so, yeah.
Yeah, and at the same time it will be really, this gives us an opportunity to answer to the also the big question if we are alone in the universe. Because we know that 3 billion years ago, Mars had similar conditions as Earth at that time, and at that time life evolved on Earth. So it's quite likely, or life could develop also on Mars. We don't know it, but with current technology, by sending only rovers and landers and scratching the surface of Mars, we didn't find anything, any form of life, any traces of life. But we know that underground water on Mars is in liquid form. So if life have developed on Mars at that time, maybe could survive until today in underground water, somewhere underground, like we have bacteria on Earth living extremophilia. These are organisms that live on Earth in extreme environments, in very, very high temperature, very low, very high pH, or also very salty environment, acid environment. And those animals or bacteria would be able to survive on Mars. So if those conditions really were good enough for life to develop, and we could find some forms of life today, it will be really breakthrough for science, for biology, even for philosophy, because first who asked if we are alone in the universe were philosophers.